Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Barbarian, and today we're here with a really interesting, albeit rather weird video, but it is something that I'm quite excited for. Today I want to talk about some of the drawbacks in EU5, or maybe rather I should reword this, I want to talk about stuff that either annoyed me or still is annoying me when playing EU5. There are some caveats to this, and I really want you to realize these caveats so that we are all on the same page, which can be a little bit difficult. Fundamentally, it is crazy that I get to talk about this stuff, but that is what they decided. We are about 2 months away from launch, and they said, hey, you can literally talk about anything. And that is exactly what I want to do here. Now, is this one of those things where I go, hey, these negatives, you need to know them, they will ruin the game? Absolutely not. There are no alarm bells that I'm trying to, kind of hit, getting to ring them so that they get fixed because this is an urgent thing. Rather, I think that normally when I talk about EU5 and going forward when I am talking about EU5, I will mostly be talking about stuff that is interesting, things that I notice, things that systemically, for example, you know that I love systems and you know that I love roleplay. Both of these, whenever I notice them, I think they are worth talking about. So that is mostly what you're going to see. But with a very open policy that Paradox has chosen for this particular game, both in how content creators get to feedback it towards the developers, but also how the developers are interacting with the community, I think it makes sense if I am equally as open. If I talk about things where I'm like, hey, either this has concerned me, for example, when I started playing this game, or does concern me just in general. Now, like I said, none of these are game breakers, at least as far as I'm concerned. They aren't really even close to being game breakers. But I think talking about them out in the open is a good choice. Especially, and this is the last part of this preamble, because everything that I am going to tell you here, I already had the pleasure of telling the devs. Like I said, it is an incredibly active exchange. As I was playing the game, as these things either annoyed me, they hit me, yada yada yada, well, I just reported it. I made so many threads, in particular to the first topic you're going to see about this, and I think it won't be surprising to you. But yeah, all of this is already known, the productive part is already underway, so hopefully what I was playing is literally the worst version of the game that I will ever be playing, because we are of course going to look towards this being of course worked on already by the team. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about two major issues, one that I think will be accompanying the game just because of the complexity of the game, and then one that kind of I think you need to hit your stride, which I am not sure that it has been there yet, and then a couple of smaller issues just so you know what goes through my head as I play, but all those smaller issues are really not that interesting. Because chances are that, yeah, they are fixable, they will be fixed, for those I'm really confident. Now the first one, who would have guessed it, it's the UX, and I am not talking about the visual style. I have a couple of images right here, you can see how this has developed, right? This is June, this is May, and this is August, so 2024 all the way now to 2025. The look clearly has changed a lot. Had I gotten this version right here, I would have said, you know what, I'm really not feeling this. I gotta be honest with you, when it comes to the visuals of the UX, or the UI, I have no real issues. I think there are certain things where I'm saying, yes, this would be nicer. For example, actually, I did report this one as well because I'm a stickler for this stuff. You see this right here? Every major screen, for example, doesn't have any shading behind these type of info blips that are in the art right there. I personally don't like it. I was like, I love when my eye can snap to something, so I reported it, right? So yeah, there are some visual things where I'm like, I would like this addressed, but there is something about the UX that I think accompanies this game for an entirely kind of procedural reason, and I think it will be accompanying it for quite some time to go. Let me draw you something. This right here is a graph that I call enjoyment over time. So this means what is happening, how are you feeling about the game as you're playing, the more hours you put in. And I think that there is a pretty comparable pattern to many other games, in particular Paradox games, but strategy games in general. So you start maybe somewhere here and then you have this massive valley because nothing makes sense. You're trying to figure it out, what exactly is happening there, and then slowly but surely you emerge. I will tell you right now that there are some grand strategy games, even by Paradox, that don't really have this valley. I think in particular CK3, quite frankly, the mechanics are so intuitive. At the end of the day, you just need to play a character, and maybe later you're gonna hit some snags with understanding, for example, succession laws, that kind of thing, but in general, it is just intuitively understandable. There are some other games that are, especially if they are very systemically minded, struggling with this, where the valley is incredibly deep. I will be honest with you right now, the graph for EU5 for me, and I'm a very experienced grand strategy player, looked something like this. These are like my first 10 hours, and then all of a sudden we pop off, okay? What am I describing here? What was going on? Well, this valley right here was incredibly deep for me for EU5, and the reason for this, ultimately, yes, it is the UX. Now, like I said, I have reported a lot, and I think in the coming week and in the coming weeks altogether, I'm going to be reporting a lot more. Many other content creators are also active in this. This difficulty goes beyond just, hey, there are some temporary mistakes. I already told you, for example, right, that there are some bugs related to, hey, the AI colonizing, there's malaria on an island where there shouldn't be malaria, blah blah blah. That is like a couple of changes and it is good to go. When you have an incredibly systemic game, and this was also true for Victoria 3 at launch, for example, and I think it will be true for EU5 at launch, it is so difficult. It might be one of the hardest jobs on the team to get the user experience to be right. Be that for somebody that is new to this genre or to somebody that is very experienced in it. There are many examples of this that I can give you. This interface right here, for example, is one of them as well. If you take a look at this right here, and you might have already noticed this in various screenshots of, for example, the provinces, right? Take a look at this right there. This thing right there is the building. And the building is the big part of this image rather than the icon of the actual good. The consequence here is that if you have a screen, and there are some, where you primarily have no text, you just have the building, you just see a chain of these buildings and then you need to double check what the goods are. This is logical because they are saying, hey, it matters what tier you are on. So the building itself determines, or rather it shows you, is this one of the early tier buildings or is this one of the late tier buildings? But in reality, I find myself very often looking for the actual good instead of, well, the tier of the building. The consequence being that the UI tries something good, it tries to show me something meaningful, but realistically speaking, it isn't doing this. There is a variety of user interfaces, so of windows in particular, that I could point to right now. Not that it means anything to you, because you haven't seen that footage anyway, but essentially I could point to them and say this window, like what I am actually looking for in this window, isn't presented at all. I really want to stress, what they are doing with the UX isn't inherently bad. There is no point where I would personally go, they are just completely kind of ill-designing this, not at all. In fact, I would argue again, the UX designers just have incredibly difficult jobs here. Nonetheless, the first 10 to 15 hours I was cursing under my breath with a frequency that has never happened in my life. I swear. The reality of it just was that with the way things are, with how systemically oriented this game is, I was struggling. And listen, maybe they are miracle workers, but I will tell you right now that I think when you get this game into your hands, chances are that you will hit those moments as well. But hopefully much less than I had it. Nonetheless, I would be kind of missing out on telling you the full story if I didn't tell you that that was incredibly frustrating. There's, for example, such one of these things where if you want to trade the way that I described it in the England game, you have to de-automate trade and then automate trade in every single individual market so that you can de-automate it at any given point. The entire routine is so multifaceted, so stacked with individual steps. You know, there are moments where I sit down and I say to myself, I just want to know what this does, and then I have to hover into 3 tooltips. This stuff happens. Like I said, this is incredibly complex, and it is totally worth to get through this valley of death. But the valley in EU5, at least the way that I have currently been playing it, it's pretty deep compared to other games. Now, I will also tell you, they also do so much right with these windows. I do want to point this out. This is the negative video, but this search bar right here, oh my god, it is so good. I need it in every single systemically minded game. Victoria 3 needs this wherever we can get it, okay? I will just tell you in general, this search bar, you can have so many filters, you can just, once you know what you're trying to build, what your supply chain is, you will search this in no time whatsoever. This interface doesn't bother you at all anymore. There are really upsides. They are doing a good job. It's just that this game is so incredibly complex, and seriously, I was swearing like a sailor. I was, there's a valley. But like I said, I am confident, even though this will probably accompany this game for years to come just because of how complex it is. This is just the way this works with systemic games. This is probably the least intuitive version that I will ever play, that you will never have to play, and I hope that your valley is considerably shorter. Now, the next point is one of those that I think is dependent very much on what kind of player type you are. For me, of course, I mean, I've played all of the grand strategy games, really, but I'm a role player at heart. That is what I do, even though I understand the numbers, the systems, the mechanics. I will abstain and refrain from pushing myself too far, because I want to stay somewhat competitive. I enjoy doing this. So for a type like myself, the role player, I like good flavor. I really do. And I want to differentiate when it comes to flavor in EU5 between mechanically integrated flavor and non-mechanically integrated flavor, okay? So mechanically integrated flavor, for example, are situations. They are disasters. It could also be just regencies in general. It could be international organizations. This is flavor where you will see events, where you have buttons, where you get to do certain things that you do not normally do in this game, that are deeply, deeply connected and embedded in everything that is mechanically happening in EU5. And in EU5, what is mechanically happening is incredibly rich. What is going on there compared to EU4 is a whole lot more, because this game isn't nearly as much of a board game. I really want to reiterate, if you're like, hey, wait a minute, you called it a board game, that's not criticism. EU4 is really good at being a board game. It doesn't appeal to me, but I know that what it does incredibly well. But the reality is that when we have non-mechanical flavor, kind of acts like EU5 is also a board game. What I mean here is that when you look at EU4 flavor, you will primarily run into an issue where basically most events will say which resource do you want to lose. Because in a board game, your resources are everything. In EU4, right, we have admin, we have diplomacy, we have military. These are your 3 pipelines. They facilitate virtually everything. Even though there are some other factors, you got stability, you got overextension, etc., etc., you got development. Those are ultimately a proxy for how efficient you are spending your 3 pipelines. So far, so clear. Now, in a game where things are a lot more complex, to me at least, it feels pretty bad when many of the non-mechanical flavor events are stuff like, hey, by the way, do you want to lose this or this resource? Because that makes it so that I don't really care about the flavor event anymore. Now, in a board game, like I said, this is the be-all, end-all, but in EU5, to me personally, this doesn't appeal. This is partially a consequence, because in EU5, we do also have events of EU4, just in general. But I will also say, I just think this is kind of what they're leaning into with the events. And to me personally, it doesn't really appeal. When I think, for example, of non-systemic games like CK3, well, there are so many alternatives of what could be done for flavor that is more personal, yet still spending resources, of course, but that is more interesting to me. When I think of activities in CK3, for example, right, pretty obvious, I get to choose what content I want to see via intents. I can sit down and I can do a particular activity that, again, is gated. I can, for example, also just look at very, very particularly minded content. Content that really cares and targets who's my nemesis, who's my lover, and so on and so forth. Is CK3's flavor perfect? No, absolutely not. There's always something to complain about in the life of a grand strategy player. But realistically, I read those events, I care about those events a lot more than I do about, do you want to lose 15 stability, or do you want to lose 15 approval? This is a 20, whatever. 20 approval from an estate. I don't really see any storyline. There's nothing really interesting happening there. I just weigh my resources, and that is everything that I do. I will say, maybe for many of you, this won't even be a concern that annoys you. But for me personally, with a game that isn't just a board game, with a game that is so interesting, that has all these rebellions and stuff, and that has arguably really good flavor in the mechanical category, another one, and I really want to just kind of push towards the disasters right there. I like Court and Country, I like the Janissary Rebellion, I like the rebellion of that one farmer, I like the Welsh Rebellion in England. All of that stuff is super interesting, but there are so many events in this game that you get hit by that are just questions of, hey, which resource do you want to lose? I don't know. In a game that isn't really board game minded, this to me is really not good. And I don't think it's going to change all too much, because obviously, in a sense, I get it. More flavor is more flavor. More events are more events. It feels less empty. Sure. It's just, I don't know. I personally definitely could do without. So as a consequence, I often sit there and I much love what is going on with these, but then there's so much non-mechanical flavor where I'm just losing a resource as though I am playing EU4. It really doesn't work for me. I gotta tell you, to me personally, that kind of wears it down for sure. Now, like I said, these were the 2 points that I think are a semi-universal experience. Ultimately, the learning hole, right, that you can fall into, I think that's going to hit everybody, although hopefully much less than myself. You're probably not going to be as frustrated, because they are pouring so much work into this, and they are getting a lot of feedback, of course, including from me. So I do believe that it's going to get better. It's just with a game this systemic, yeah, it's going to take some time. It is not easy at all to really figure that out. Simultaneously, when it comes to flavor, for me, that is definitely something where I'm like, yeah, this is one of the weaker parts, but there is also good flavors, so I know that they kind of have figured out how to do it. I just want to see more of that rather than the other side. Ultimately though, I think this is more a role player concern. Now, I could talk for hours and hours and hours about UI and UX, but I much rather do this in, well, reporting it. There are actually a bunch of windows that I wholesale want to talk about, you know, kind of draw around and then send that into them, hopefully kind of being able to help them out a little bit there in terms of what I would like to see in that window and what I can't see. For example, the battle interface, a lot of stuff related to building, trade, of course, that is last but not least kind of that kind of thing. But I'm not going to tell you about these in greater detail because you don't really need to know about them right now. These are all work in progress. So just the general feeling that I have is that this game, much like Wiki 3 for example and Hoi 4, yeah, explaining something that is that systemic, it's going to take some time. Now, I do have a bunch of tidbits that I also want to talk about, just to mention, just so that you know what I kind of, you know, overlook, but I won't be re-mentioning too much. Again, I really love that they're giving us here this much freedom to talk about it, and I think rather than saving it out, let me just tell you about this so that you can be looking forward to you not suffering through this in the exact same fashion. Now, there are, of course, also a couple of other things. Like I said, I don't really want to harp over, well, you know, bugs or stuff that is just misbalanced. This stuff is constantly going to change. The game in 1.0 will definitely be balanced much differently compared to, I don't know, a year later. That's literally just how this works. You kind of gotta enjoy those times, I feel, because they will never come back. In CK3 1.0, the Vikings were taking colonies literally everywhere. In Victoria 3 1.0, well, you were effectively looking at the AI just literally not caring where territory is, they would just take it. I remember Hoi 4 1.0, I was playing a minor multiplayer game with my friends, and we were, as New Zealand and like South Africa, randomly invading the USA because it just didn't work that way, or work any other way as we were playing the game right there. All of this has changed, and these times were fun, even if kind of broken. So I don't really want to obsess with this because I think it's going to be fine. I can tell you a couple of other things, and that is, for example, that I think the missions that are currently in the game are more tutorial than anything else. I literally turned them off. I am looking forward to missions being Imperator Rome style, you know, going forward after 1.0, but I don't think this is one of the strongest elements even now. When it comes to the map, for example, I also hear a lot of people talking about it, how they don't like the way it looks. I personally don't really mind it. If anything, I want to say that I think the map needs to be normalized a little bit. It is kind of annoying, it's kind of difficult to see in certain areas where your armies are, where the next location is, and so on. But again, yeah, evolving discipline. Another element for sure, also coming of course from EU4, is the Parliament. Parliament is really interesting and very important, but you do it a lot. I mean, in one playthrough, you do it a lot there. You're gonna have a lot of those sessions, and they aren't all going to be too difficult. I wish that they did more there, but it's not really something where I go, this is ruining my experience. It's just a holdover from EU4. I think ultimately they're gonna expand on this as well. And another point, and I like it in general, are characters. There are some ways that you can kind of deal with, you know, it becoming a bit much. You can auto, of course, assign, for example, admirals and generals, so these people will just be assigned to that army and to the fleet. You don't need to worry about it. But at the same time, council management can be a lot. Yeah, it's kind of also just a UX issue. If I can automate who is in the council as long as they have the stat that I need, I will be happy. Characters still add a lot to the game. I wouldn't want it to be it without it, but it's a little bit of an annoyance, I guess, and now you know. Simultaneously, I already talked about the fact that warfare here and there feels slightly bad, either because I don't really have an overview. I mentioned, by the way, and I want to highlight this because I saw people being like, I'm confused why this is an issue. The indicator, we do have an indicator of, hey, by the way, you can't see into this province over there, but that indicator is applied when I can't see into that province. I already know I can't see into that province because I can't see into that province. Yeah, like I said, this is not one of those unfixable issues, but it is kind of annoying to me, and this is the video where I get to say this. And yeah, I guess then the rest is mostly balancing stuff. PUs, for example, could be a bit more rewarding, but I like the system. Diplomacy is one of those things where, yeah, I think the AI could kind of stick a little bit more to you. You also have a peace deal interface that, you know, I keep going back to the interface. But like I said, none of those things are really breaking anything in the game where I would say, you know what, I can't play it, or I am much not enjoying it. Those were really only Flavour and the UX. So, I guess this is it. I told you everything that I found really annoying, mostly focusing on the two core elements right there. But just so you know, yeah, the game isn't perfect. No game is perfect, and I find it really interesting that they allow us to say that, to talk about it, to tell you what kind of annoyed me. Although, I really want to add, again, now at the end of the video, the caveats that I've reported all of this stuff. I'm gonna be reporting more of this stuff. They already know this stuff, they're working hard, and it's going to come out much better than it currently is. My big concern really is just the UX, because I know how bad UX can feel, because I'm an avid Victoria 3 player, and there was a lot that wasn't right there in 1.0. But all in all, quite frankly, to be honest with you, If you're willing to push through this, there's a lot waiting behind that. I'm looking forward to talking more about this here on the channel in other videos as well, of course, going forward. In fact, I will actually be playing in China in my next playthrough because I want to see how that plays. China is one of those edge cases. There's a lot of people living there, so a lot of pop. Does that still work? Does it break any systems? How is the actual situation in China? How do you deal with the international organization? I want to find out. So yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about the good stuff now that I got to talk about the bad stuff. If you got any more questions, by the way, I will be doing a video just answering your questions. And I guess this is about it. There is a lot more to be said about this game, but I think in general, I'm pretty confident that the reports that we're doing, the reports that you will be doing, of course, once the game is out, that they will change a lot. The team is very dedicated and the team is doing a lot. It's just that, seriously, I pity the UX designers because making a good UX for this type of game, ouch, that's a difficult task. If you got any questions, post them in the comments right here, of course. If you want to know more about the kind of feedback and about the negatives that I do have on my mind about this game, also feel free to write about it in the comments. But yeah, just in general, listen, I like that I can talk about this, and I think it might clear a couple of things up for you. In particular, how worried should you be about the UX, and so on. So, happy to make this video. For now, I'll leave you right here, and I'll see you later, alligator.